Hello and welcome to India Speaks, the podcast by the Center for Policy Research. I'm Sushant Singh, Senior Fellow at CPR. You are listening to our special series titled Spotlight South Asia that brings leading experts from India's neighborhood to make sense of that country's political, economic, and social developments and what these developments mean for India. The country featured today is Pakistan, and my guest today is Mosharraf Zaidi. Mosharraf Zaidi is a Pakistani public policy professional and the founder and CEO of Tabadlab, an Islamabad-based policy think tank. He writes a weekly column for the News International and is a senior advisor for the Albright Stonebridge Group. Previously, he served as a policy advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs between 2011 and 2013. From 2013 to 2018, he founded and led the Alif Elan campaign in Pakistan towards addressing the education crisis in that country. In 2014, he was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum for leading a global campaign aimed towards improving the quality of education for children in Pakistan. Mosharraf, welcome to Spotlight South Asia.
Thanks for having me, Sushant.
Mosharraf, to begin with, if someone went to sleep at the end of 2021 and woke up just now, how would you explain what is going on inside Pakistan to them? The politics and economics have grabbed most of the attention, but there are other issues as well. But let's begin with the most interesting of them, Pakistani politics. I understand the situation is very fluid as on the day we are recording, but what really has transpired in the last 7 months, so to speak?
I mean, if somebody was to go to sleep in late 2021 and wake up now, the first thing I would ask them is there a secret to deep sleep and slumber? And also, I would seek their advice on how to get some of whatever they're on, because I think it's been a very tumultuous and unstable time. It's a very painful time, I think, for people in the whole world in terms of the massive cost of living, escalation, the impact it has on small families, on communities. I think in our countries, throughout the South Asia region, we've watched what's been happening in Sri Lanka, not from afar, but really from inside, because for so many of us, there's very little difference when push comes to shove at the human level within this region. And so I think that I would say to whoever was waking up and asking is to pray for the whole region, certainly to pray for Pakistan. What has happened in Pakistan is a repeat of what's happened many times before, which is that the military and civilian authorities in the country have fallen out of favor with each other. And the resolution of their conflict was not possible through conversation or dialogue or coercion. And therefore, the resolution is playing out before your eyes. We are now, I think, at a very interesting crossroads, but not one that Pakistan hasn't experienced before. We will, I think, continue to muddle along politically. It seems difficult to imagine that there will be any early resolution of the crisis. There's all possibility of the crisis getting worse. And of course, the kind of underlying theme in this crisis, at least partially, is the worry amongst civilians, not just PTI, but the other parties as well, the party in power today, the PMLN and the PPP, all of them sharing a certain trepidation and anxiety about who might be calling the shots in Rawalpindi as of November 2022. So the likelihood of an early resolution, as I said, pretty low, and the beginnings of a resolution probably sometime November onwards.
What would be the contours of that resolution? Would it be a new general election, or would it be somebody in Rawalpindi who decides to bless one or the other party? How do you see the resolution going?
I think one of the challenges that I think a lot of people outside Pakistan have is the notion that Pindi is all powerful and has the capacity to determine who is running the country. And I think partly that impression is informed by a reality, which is the inordinate amount of power that Rawalpindi wields over the Pakistani political system. But it is not infinite power. And so I always say in any formulation, there is God and the universe, and then everything else. And no entity, including the military, have that kind of power. So I think the idea of one or another army chief blessing one or another prime minister, that is a fantasy that both civilians and military leaders have clung to, and they've enjoyed short, brief, love affairs like the one enjoyed by General Bajwa and Prime Minister Sharif in the early days of General Bajwa's ascension to his office of Chief of Army Staff. Certainly a romance between General Bajwa and Imran Khan when Imran Khan was ascended to the highest office in the land, the office of the Prime Minister. But ultimately, power is a real drag on love. And so these conflicts, no matter who is the army chief and who is the prime minister, the fundamental dynamic that I think we're seeing play out today is not one that's going to disappear. And so I think the more important questions in Pakistan are about how an economic compact for stability will be reached and how the political system will be able to supply that compact with the basic fuel and oxygen that it needs, of the absence of protests every day, the absence of constant undermining of the legitimacy and the authority of the state, and the presence of a credible deterrent in terms of dealing with non-state actors and terrorist groups, including those that have, that at least Pakistanis believe have enjoyed the support of Pakistan's adversaries.
I'll come back to each of these issues, Mosharraf, that you raised, the economy and the internal security. But just going back into the politics a bit, what is the role of judiciary now in Pakistan in this? They seem to be suddenly acquiring a very, very powerful, very strong role with everyone going to them. How did this come about?
Well, the judiciary has always been an integral part of the validation and justification of whatever was happening in the country that enjoyed the full force of either people's power or the power of the military behind it. And those two things are not always at odds, which is really one thing that a lot of folks, again, both inside Pakistan and outside, make the mistake of convoluting. The military's views and the people's views are sometimes perfectly aligned, and at times like that, there is stability and love affairs are tenable between prime ministers and army chiefs. But sometimes what the military wants and what the people want begin to diverge. And when they do, you have crisis. And so in terms of the judiciary's relevance, sometimes the judiciary has acted in support of military power, and sometimes it's acted as a resistor to military power. And in both cases, it's buttressing or supplementing another gravitational force, whether it's Rawalpindi or the people. The most recent, I think, upgradation of the judiciary's role or stature in Pakistan took place during the lawyers' movement between 2006 and 2008. And that lawyers' movement established the autonomous authority of the Supreme Court, and in particular the Chief Justice, to act in accordance with what they deemed to be the correct interpretation of the law. That autonomy has been deployed both tactically and strategically by various chiefs since the Chief Justice that led that lawyers' movement. And maybe some of your listeners will recall that, of course, that lawyers' movement is really what felled General Pervez Musharraf, somebody that I know many friends and listeners in India are very, very familiar with. Having felled that powerful a man, and having established its credentials as being able to mobilize people power in a very substantial way, the judiciary now has both legal and political capital that allows it to be a major player in how major decisions in Pakistan are taken and how the constitution and the law is interpreted at critical junctures. And of course, we're at one of those junctures and have been for the last few months, those last 7 months in which our friendly neighborhood observer was sleeping. The judiciary has not been sleeping during this period and has been very, very busy.
Moshraff, is there merit to the argument which many observers inside Pakistan and even outside Pakistan have made, that once an Pakistani army chief takes an extension, and starting from Mosharraf, Kayani, Bajwa, it eventually does not end well for the chief himself and for the civil-military relations? Is there merit to that argument, or is that just a coincidence?
I'm not even sure that that's backed up by fact. I mean, I think General Rahil Sharif has been, has kind of really had an outstanding post-career sort of profile. General Kiani is also, I think widely respected, beloved within sort of the military and the veterans. Of course, he's the one that really took the fight to the terrorists that were killing Pakistani babies and women and children, on a weekly basis from 2007 to 2014. So General Kiani, General Sharif, both I think enjoy, have not had that negative a post-retirement experience. Of course, I think partly the reason that army chiefs are not subject to any kind of opprobrium post-fact or post-service is because of the incredible power that the institution enjoys. I do think my own view on extensions is that they destroy the coherence and the career paths of competent military officers in a very substantial way, and that compromises, the integrity of the institution. So Musharraf, I think, was a dictator and didn't seek any extension, but the extension that was afforded to General Kiani, the extension that was afforded to the current army chief, General Bajwa, they, I think, both have done great damage to the military. But I am an outsider to the military. I have no experience either within my family or within 1 or 2 degrees of the military. And, so it has to be taken with a pinch of salt. There are many within the military who believe that these extensions were politically and operationally necessary. I strongly disagree with that view, and I do think that it damages the military. More importantly, these extensions do great damage to the normalization of the dynamic between elected civilian governments and military chiefs, because the supposition or the assumption that drives these extensions is not really national security. It is a degree of comfort that is developed between the ruling civilian of the day and the ruling military leader of the day. In General Kiani's case, there was a compact between President Asif Ali Zardari of the PPP and General Kiani. In the case of General Bajwa, the extension was predicated on the comfort level enjoyed between and by Prime Minister Imran Khan of the time and General Bajwa. So, as Imran Khan himself will tell you today, and as Zardari in an honest moment will tell you anytime, those quid pro quos or those exchanges or those transactions came at a substantial political cost to the prime minister or the president or the political leader of the time who made that extension, who signed off on it. Ultimately, as much as we criticize the military for seeking and sustaining these terms for the chiefs, there is a willing partner that they find within the political spectrum. And not long after the partner experiences the fruits, the poison fruits of those extensions, do they begin to complain about the military's overwhelming power.
Fair enough. That's actually a very great answer. Very good understanding of how the situation is playing out. Musharraf, this post-Musharraf institutional setup, with an oversized role for the military, but without being at the front of governance or ruling the country, is it really not working in Pakistan anymore? Would it be fair to say this? Or are we saying this is perfectly fine, this is working fine, or is there a way in which it can be fixed moving ahead?
So, Sushant, I think that it's easy to look at Pakistan in isolation and come to the conclusion, much in the way that I've done a couple of threads about this, and I've been writing about the evolution of our system myself. But I think there's a danger in kind of treating Pakistan as this isolated incident or this isolated test case for its own democracy. We look at the whole world. The technology for how we talk to each other has changed. The way in which people congregate, mobilize, transact, negotiate with each other has fundamentally changed. Human voice and agency has dramatically changed. And so the question then becomes, do the institutions and the rules of the game that were agreed upon prior to 2007, of course, being the kind of coming of age moment for Facebook, prior to that point in time, we had a technology for how societies interacted with each other. And broadly, the Western liberal doctrine, which frankly, South Asia is, if not a wholly willing, then at least a lukewarm sentiment, signatory to that entire edifice has begun to come apart at the seams in France, in the UK, in the United States, in Brazil, in the Philippines, in Hungary, as we're seeing in Pakistan. Now, is that really a Pakistani democracy problem? Well, it is, insofar as the things that are specific to Pakistan, which we talked about, the civilian-military divide, which I think is the principal contradiction, to borrow from Mao's sort of framing. And there's a different principal contradiction maybe in India and in Nepal and Sri Lanka. But what's happening in terms of the politics, I think, is common. And so, yes, we are seeing a breakdown of the Pakistani Federalist project, which is a project that goes back to 1973 and the Pakistani Constitution, and the renewal of that project that really took place in 2006 and then again in 2010 in terms of the Charter of Democracy and the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. But I'm not sure that the problems we have today are specific, A, to Pakistan, or B, to the structures of the 18th Amendment and the 1973 Constitution and the idea of federalism or the idea of democracy. I think there are a wider problem writ large across the whole world. And that's part of the reason why the struggle here is so real.
Fair enough, and it's almost, to use another Chinese phrase, this is politics with Pakistani characteristics. And in India, it is politics with Indian characteristics within this, new global dynamics that we are seeing playing out. Coming to the economy, which you referred to earlier, a lot of people have been talking about Pakistan being another Sri Lanka economically. Noah Smith has written about at his Substack newsletter. Atif Mia of Princeton University did that wonderful thread, which attracted a lot of attention. What exactly is the economic situation as per you? Who is inside Pakistan?
So the economic situation in Pakistan is troubling, Sushant. I think we're looking at the real prospects of Pakistan being unable to meet its short and medium term debt obligations. These are essentially driven by concerns in the bond market, where Pakistan has gone and used the bond market to finance its needs over the past few years. More importantly, I think the inflationary pressures caused by the Russia invasion of Ukraine has really devastated ordinary people in Pakistan. The price of gasoline or petroleum has increased most dramatically ever. People have never seen this kind of an escalation in this short a time span. That has caused real consternation and a real lack of confidence across the market. I think we're already seeing signs of demand suppression, which naturally is going to result in a slowdown of economic growth. Any kind of slowdown in economic growth for a country of 234 million people that has not enjoyed 10 or 15 years in the way that China or India have in terms of sustained economic growth, that's a real problem. So I think, the economic situation is dire. I don't anticipate that there will be a sovereign debt default, but I also don't think that that's fundamentally the issue in the Pakistani economy. That's a red or green light on a specific metric. But as far as the health and the well-being of the economy is concerned, that's not going to get resolved anytime soon, no matter how swiftly Pakistan is able to exit this kind of red zone of crisis around the debt issue.
Any long-term solutions to your mind, or even medium-term solutions to put the Pakistani economy on a high growth path?
Well, as you know, Sushant, I've spent many years arguing for Pakistan-India normalization. I've changed my tune since August 5th, 2019. I don't think that Pakistan can engage in that kind of a robust economic relationship with India in the absence of some measure of addressal of key issues. But I certainly think that medium term, and I think even short term, there are substantial benefits to trade and connectivity around Pakistan's various regions. Pakistan is a great example of a connector country. It connects the GCC to Central Asia, South Asia to the Persian Gulf, the Central Asian states to the Arabian Sea. I believe it's a substantial stakeholder in the Indo-Pacific. And so in terms of the actual economic potential of the country, it's enormous. But in terms of how likely that potential is going to be met, how soon it's likely to be met, I'm not as much of an optimist as I would like to be.
Mosharraf, when I was in Pakistan 5 years ago, the CPEC was tom-tommed as this big transformative project, which is going to transform the economy and the geoeconomics and the geopolitics of the country. How has it shaped up, and why did it not live up to those expectations?
Well, I think that the CPEC has exceeded at least my expectations. To me, the CPEC package of investments and loans were a necessary element of Pakistan extracting itself from the very, very dark days of the early 2010s. Again, Sushant, you'll recall, even 5 years ago when you were here, that would have been around 2016 or 17, Pakistan was still in the midst of a very substantial power crisis. Now, Pakistan still has a major crisis in terms of power, insofar as it's not carbon neutral. There's hardly any offsets. There's no adaptation or adoption plan. We don't have a climate transition plan that is credible as of right now, although the government and the new Minister for Climate is working on that assiduously. Pakistan also has a public financing problem with its energy sector. But the one problem Pakistan does not have anymore is constant rolling blackouts owing to a lack of capacity. So when you have blackouts in Pakistan today, it's because people aren't paying their bills. Now, that's a big problem, but that's a much smaller problem than the problem of not being able to generate electricity altogether. That problem solution set came from CPEC. The entirety of the doubling of Pakistan's energy generation, electricity generation capacity, doubling between 2014 and 2018. In 4 years, Pakistan doubled its entire national electricity generation capacity. And it didn't do it alone. It did it because of CPEC, almost entirely because of CPEC. So I think people have a misunderstanding of what CPEC was. There is no short-term fix for a country's, rolling economic crises. That has to come from within the country. But as far as the most effective external financing of Pakistan's solutions, there is no peer to CPEC in terms of what it helped achieve. And by the way, I'm not even touching the infrastructure in terms of roads and highways that CPEC helped build. That's a whole other chapter. Again, mostly of successes. CPEC has helped Pakistan tremendously. The problems Pakistan has are Pakistani problems, not CPEC problems.
Oh, fair enough, because a lot of us look at whatever China does through a Western prism. Unfortunately, that's the nature we look at these things with. Mosharraf, something much closer to your heart, and this is something the social indicators in Pakistan amongst the economic crisis, the political turmoil, and the pandemic. How are the social indicators holding up? The education, the public health, etc. How are these things doing?
I think let me start with the good news. As you would have seen, I think Pakistan's management of the COVID-19 crisis was sort of top of class, really, even globally. There were very significant public policy and public sector innovations, including adopting and adapting models for data analysis that were originally used for the polio campaign and the polio program in Pakistan. Routine immunizations, which have always been a challenge at the margins in Pakistan, really helped Pakistan develop a very effective COVID-19 immunization regime. So I think public health might be in the best position it's ever been in terms of its footing to be able to address the challenges across the country. The health insurance schemes that were begun by Nawaz Sharif in 2014, 2015 were really scaled up dramatically by Imran Khan between 2018 and 2022. And I think some of those fruits, certainly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, have become visible. There are also, I think, good indicators around the degree to which technology was used to solve some social indicator challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. You guys have the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act as a global sort of standard for social protection. Pakistan has something called the Benazir Income Support Program, which was broadly rebranded by Imran Khan for political reasons. But essentially, Khan took something very, very potent and good and scaled it in a massive way. So I think those are some of the good news things that have happened, especially since you mentioned the pandemic, through the pandemic. There are, of course, some real worrying signs and some alarm bells. Principally for me, as you know, education is really central to sort of how I think about the world and how I think about this country. A lot of it has to do with being from UP and being a beneficiary of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's vision intergenerationally. And so I think on education, there are serious concerns about the learning losses that have accumulated during the COVID-19 pandemic and how those learning losses are going to be addressed. Traditionally, I've been a campaigner for getting out of children's school, out of school children into school. I think one of the challenges for people like me is to think about what a non-school solution looks like for some of these challenges, because it doesn't look likely that we're going to be able to recover those out-of-school children numbers back to even pre-pandemic levels. And again, the fact that there's a constant political and economic crisis means that the attention that we can draw to education and to public health and to routine immunizations and to population welfare and to social protection, all of those things become compromised in an environment, in an ecosystem where we're constantly firefighting. Not to mention, to make all of this much more difficult is the climate emergency, which I'm sure you're experiencing in India as well. We have floods and we have extreme weather now almost throughout the year. And some of the flooding in Karachi gets more attention, but there's been flooding throughout Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And these climate events really severely undermine the capacity of communities to invest in themselves and for governments to invest in those communities from a human development perspective. So obviously those remain, areas of great concern. And again, I think areas that one day, hopefully Pakistanis and Indians can work on together, but we won't be able to do that unless the people of India push back on what's happening in Kashmir and what's happening with Indian minorities, in particular Indian Muslims.
Musharraf, before I let you go, just a couple of quick questions. One is something which you have written a lot about, the internal security situation in Pakistan and the negotiation with the militant groups in the erstwhile FATA. What's going on there and what's with Afghanistan? Something which you dealt with when you were in the MOFA.
Well, I think the talks with the TTP are something that I think is inevitable in any conflict, is that you sit down with the adversary and you talk to them. But I think that there are concerns in Pakistan about the process that's been adopted for these talks. The question is not just of inclusivity, but of authority and legitimacy. The people of Pakistan, and in particular the people of the former tribal areas, the people of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they've really suffered a lot. And without addressing the quality of life for those people, any kind of resolution, I think constitutions are also man-made. And I often come across as maybe a constitutional fundamentalist, which is something that personally I'm very happy to own and try to live up to. But I'm also conscious that, peace is a very, very valuable thing. And if we can find a peace, we must find it. The challenge is that there need to be certain norms and principles and values that the peace adheres to. Otherwise, it's not peace, it's submission. I think we don't know enough about the process to be satisfied that it's going to lead to better outcomes for all people in Pakistan. I think there's a big difference between finding a ceasefire that is temporary and coming to a compact in which the reasons for picking up arms are removed, or the incentives for picking up arms are less than the disincentives. Those conditions are for the Pakistani state to create. And I think there's lots of questions about whether the current TTP talks adhere to those conditions as well as certainly somebody like I would like them to.
And let me brace up before I ask this question. How does today's India look from Pakistan to someone like you who's traveled to India enough, whose family origins were in India at some point in time? How does today's India look to you?
I was about to say something instinctively, and I think maybe it's important to
go ahead, say it.
Look, Sushant, I love the idea of India. I love the India that's at least in my head and in my heart, which is a country that's the largest country in this region that deserves to be a world leader. Really, the people of India deserve to be proud of who they are and what they stand for, except that they actually need to then be proud of it. Can Indians be proud of the way that Muslims are being treated in that country? Can India truly be proud of the way that it has, annexed and occupied Kashmir? And therefore, can any Pakistani in good conscience sit down and express the kind of sentiment that I've just expressed? And so India looks very troubling from here. If Pakistan was to do a repeat version of what India is doing to itself, it looks 100 times more dire than Pakistan looks today. The comparison, I know a lot of Indians are very, very unhappy and uncomfortable with these comparisons. But I think that the grandness of what Mother India could be and what it is being reduced to is something that right-wing Indians, people in the RSS, need to really revisit and think through. This current path is not the path to Indian greatness. And as long as Indians themselves don't recognize the dangers of this path, there's very little that any Pakistani or anyone anywhere on the planet can do. I'm a well-wisher of India's, but I'm more a well-wisher of Pakistan's. The current path that India is on is also deeply damaging and worrying for Pakistan and its own national security. So for all of those reasons, I pray that India does not continue on this path, and I pray for better things for India and for the whole region.
If that assures you in any manner, Mosharraf, within India, there's a great contestation going on about the path that India needs to choose, and the fact that this whole region needs certain kind of stability, certain kind of peace and security. It is not that any of these extreme steps are going uncontested within India. There's a deep contestation within various forces within India as well to keep India on the right path, on a good path. Even though I may disagree with some of the characterizations that you have made about today's India, but there's something else which I wanted to ask, and more as a South Asian. How do you keep hope alive in such a situation? Whether it is inside Pakistan, whether it is inside India, with whatever is, or in Sri Lanka, whatever is going on with the economy, with the polity, with the pandemic, with so many other things, with what is going on in Ukraine. How does one keep hope alive?
Sushant, my hope is anchored in my faith, and so as long as the universe continues to be, the domain of God Almighty, and all light is shown through the furnace and through the chandelier that is the Prophet. There can be no lack of hope, and I know that throughout the region, faith is really important to all of us. I think faith is a beautiful thing, and it brings people together, and it should be used to bring people together. So for me, my belief is that we are no less than any other region in terms of our identity. We are no less than any identity on the planet, and we deserve to have the region that is the most advanced on the planet. And there's no reason why, if we learn to work through our issues, that we can't get there. Do I see this happening within my lifetime? I think there's a bigger and bigger question mark on that quantum of hope.
On that hopeful note, Mosharraf Zaidi, thank you so much. As always, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Great talking to you. My best wishes to all your listeners, and I look forward to seeing you back here in Pakistan, hopefully under much better circumstances pretty soon.
Thank you for listening. For more information on our work, follow us on Twitter at CPR_India and log on to our website at www.cprindia.org.